Hey there, dear tech fam. What does real innovation in healthcare look like? Not the hype or the headlines, but the kind that quietly reshapes how doctors work, how patients are cared for, and how systems run behind the scenes. That's where Richard Kedziora comes in. RJ is a co founder of Estenda Solutions, a company that's been building data powered tools for digital health for over 2 decades. From wearables to EMRs to ambient AI in clinical settings, his work sits at the intersection of research, implementation, and patient care. In this conversation, we talk about the evolution of AI in healthcare, what's actually working in the field today. RJ also shares lessons from working inside the health system, the real challenges of implementing tech in clinical settings, and how AI is changing the way we think about aging, data, and chronic care. He also opens up about his personal philosophy, productive harmony, and how it's energy, not time, that is the key to meaningful work without burning out. Let's get into it. And I hear you, so we're all set. So yeah, RJ, let's get right into it. Great to have you. And so I'm going to start with when I read the message you sent me, what I was like just jumping to ask about AI and MedTech. What's the real? So I think up until fairly recently, we were at a position where it was a lot of like, this will be possible, this could be possible. Here it comes. I think we're at a stage now where things are happening. So what's the buzz around what's really possible today in there? And that's a big question, so you don't have to go through everything. But what are you the most excited about? Let's go there.
That is the granddaddy of all questions. Let's start there.
Let's start there. It's always great to go. It's great to go macro and then go micro after.
There you go. Just dive in. It's interesting because I've been following AI for decades now. I graduated comp sci degree in the early 90s and had the early intention of going on to get a PhD in AI. And then I got a job offer and it was like, more debt or earn a living and go out in the world. I did choose to go out into the world at that time, but I've always kept track and played along and had some projects over the years in AI. You know, as a lot of people are aware, Gen AI is what's transforming and making the difference these days. And we haven't realized the potential yet of what it's capable of. We're still discovering, we're still figuring out how to use it, what its limitations are. On one aspect, it is now past the Turing test. It is doing competitive level math, PhD level math kind of thing, exceeding all expectations. And the other, sometimes it's challenged to like count the R's in strawberry. So it's this odd mix of it is incredibly powerful, but also it has some basic challenges. So can it replace humans? No, not yet. Is it more capable than a vast majority of the population? Unfortunately, yes, it is.
I do think that the not being able to count the R's in strawberry, because for me, it's like I'll write something and I'll be like, I'll put it back in there. Like, can you turn this into 200 words or 100 words? And it'll be like 135. And I'm so, but what makes me okay with that is I don't feel obsolete. I'm like, all right, you still need me. You still need me to press the buttons. And so that's not the end of the world. Can we go back a little bit? So I was going to go into your story a little bit later on, but the PhD in AI. So I've listened to a few of your other podcasts. You've said this before. Okay. Can you tell me what that looked like back then when you were contemplating it? Like, what was the thought process there and what that would have looked like then? Because I think it's not that it's very different from what we have now, but I think that AI as conceived in the past was a little bit, I want to say like they were more hopeful. They were too hopeful. Like they thought it was going to be at a different, like, no, not saying, we're not there yet, obviously, but I think you understand what I'm saying, where they were too expectant of what was going to be AI.
Yeah. Yes. There was a lot of hope early on of where it was going to go and what would be possible, very quickly. And it just didn't really pan out. A lot of people don't realize that AI has been around. Like the term has been coined, probably back in the 50s and in the 60s kind of thing. This idea of artificial intelligence and that computers could effectively emulate, what humans could do. In the late 80s, early 90s, it was really about how do we code all of the intelligence of a human into a system? So think more of a grand series of if then, like if this, then this, and there was lots of permutations of that kind of thing. There was no like one specific approach, but that was the idea. It's like we can codify all human knowledge and dump it into a system. And that's how you saw as it progressed and ideas progressed over time, IBM had their computer that could play, chess.
Yeah, Watson.
And the way it played chess at that point in time was it just looked at every possible permutation and could do that really fast, much faster than a human could. And that's how it was capable of doing what it's doing, where that's not how the Gen AI systems, work today. So it's a change of scope in how we look at the world. And Gen AI surprised people, like even the experts in the field, as the current capabilities sort of manifested of how they were training these systems. They were surprised on the experts part of how this quickly developed and what it was truly capable of.
Yeah, I forget what movie, but it's like it's learning, like it's actively like taking the data and turning it into something very interesting. So when it comes to Gen AI in healthcare product development, like what's hot, what's cooking?
The biggest use case today, which is quickly being adopted across the board, is ambient listening. So in the early 2000s, the government mandated everybody needed medical record systems. Those medical records, electronic medical records of EMRs. EMRs were not designed for the doctor to be able to use effectively. They were designed for collecting information about billing. So, you talk to 10 doctors, you'll probably find 10 doctors that hate their EMR. Oh, and that's just a fact of life. It is getting better over time, but that's their primary use case. It's still about collecting information, not necessarily making use of information. There's definitely, depending on the institution and how it's set up, there's a continuing of the experience. But when you go to your doctor now, you only have a few minutes of time. You don't have a ton of time. And do you want your doctor sitting there typing away at the keyboard and just staring at the screen during that, 7-10 minutes you might have? No, you don't. Did the doctor get into medicine to stare at a computer screen? No, they didn't. In some institutions, have adopted like medical scribes. So you would have, a professional that comes in and their job was just to take notes, to alleviate that from the doctor, that they wouldn't have to do that. A lot of those notes now are, they're done in what's called pajama time. It's like after you go home, let me finish this note. My daughter happens to be a physical therapist. And when she was living with us for a while, she would come home, like, be typing her notes because she didn't have time during the day. So she may have worked an 8-10 hour day, but there was, the 11th and 12th hour, same thing with doctors. They go home and do this. Now the ambient listening can hear, auditory is listening to that conversation in the room and can transcribe the notes. Same way that you or I use, Microsoft Teams or, whatever chat feature, Zoom kind of thing. There are many opportunities now where it can listen and transcribe those notes for you. And that's what's happening in the medical field now, because it's just saving an immense amount of time. And what I find fascinating in that is it doesn't necessarily provide a word-for-word translation. It's transcribing that and turning it into medical speak. An example I've seen used numerous times now is the idea of a patient comes in and they take a shot of whiskey before they go to bed to help them sleep. And the transcription is not that specifically, it's patient self-medicates, which is, if you're talking doctor to doctor, the language they're going to use. So it starts making those intelligent translations. So that's the biggest use case that's being quickly adopted. It's low risk, which is one of those challenges. And then you're also starting to see it in billing too, as you're looking at the EMR and how can we use it from an administrative perspective? Again, low risk opportunities.
So EMR, is that like Epic Systems? Is that, am I right?
Epic is, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They're the ones that have the vast majority out there now, yes.
So what are the risks of so as we're talking about, AI in terms of auditory, in terms of taking notes, how does HIPAA feel about that? How does HIPAA feel about these AI companies having that data? And I'm assuming there's some sort of a conversation there where they're like, okay, we won't use it for, targeted ads on Instagram for this patient.
Yeah, HIPAA has to enter anything in the medical field. HIPAA has to be part of the conversation. HIPAA is all about privacy and security of that data. So, these AI companies and the ones that are providing this technology are going to assign what's called a business associate agreement. And it's just a legal agreement to say that you're going to abide by the regulations of HIPAA and protect that data. That you're not going to go do anything nefarious with it. You're going to apply, reasonable security measures to protect this technology, that you're just not going to share this information or sell it, kind of thing, without anonymizing it. So, there is this idea of informed consent, let the patient know that, we're going to use your data in this fashion. We're going to anonymize it. This happens in a lot of health systems. We're going to anonymize your data and make it available for use in research, because there's just a treasure trove of information that is available there. But you want to anonymize that data.
Yeah. Well, it's I forget. I think it was Scrubs, where the main character's name is John Dorian, but he goes by JD. And he went to some study, and it said JD, because that's usually what they use to anonymize, these initials. So it's like, well, that doesn't do anything for me, because that's what I go by anyway.
That's my name.
Yeah, right. All right. So, beyond AI, what is like true innovation in broader digital health landscape today? Just so you have context, I have 4 things of notes here. I made these notes a couple days ago, and I do it on my own. So sometimes I'll read something that I wrote down, and I'll be like, what was I thinking at the time? And I was just in like a fugue state, just typing away. So if you see me confused at my notes, it's because that's past Shubo's issue, and the present Shubo's dealing with what I did then. So, but that is that, just so you know.
Yeah, at least you can read your handwriting. If I write anything down, longhand, the next day I can't read it.
It's that's only for the notes I take today, because that I have a 2-hour realization of what that is. I type up the rest, because yeah, same here. Give me, I'm not a doctor, but my handwriting is much worse than one. So
I actually had a teacher in high school that told us to develop our own unique handwriting style, so that when you get to college, nobody else will be able to understand your handwriting, and they won't want to ask for your notes. I was like, yeah, okay. So this just sort of worked out naturally for me, that nobody could read my handwriting, including myself after some time. But to answer your question, what is hot in digital health? I think the biggest areas are around wearables. I think there's a lot of exciting potential there, between blood glucose meters, the Apple Watch, the Oura Ring was sort of first ring out there. Now there's, 4 or 5 competitors that have sort of matched their capabilities of just being able to track data and information and understand what's going on, within the human body. There's, looking at brain scan now data kind of thing, and understanding the beta and theta waves and everything that's happening in your brain. Kind of thing. There's at-home devices to be able to measure that, which just unleashes a huge amount of data. And then that's where, again, when we sort of look at AI, is how do we understand this data? How do we make sense of it? And AI has that capability of understanding that data. You and I looking at it, we're not going to see these massive patterns and trends, but the computer technology can see that. But think about, so when you think wearable, and I do triathlons, and so measuring my heart rate and things like that is important to my training activity. I recognize I'm a small segment of the population. There is a large segment of the population we're getting older. The U.S. population, global populations are getting older and older. There's less and less doctors, because those doctors are also getting older and older and retiring. There's not enough people to take care of everybody that's out there. In your health is very much a factor of what you do outside of that doctor. You're lucky if you go to the doctor a couple times a year, get that 7 to 10 minutes, what you eat and how much you move physically day to day is going to have a really big impact on your health. So let's recognize that. Let's understand what's happening like that. And as you're getting older, and maybe your cognitive capabilities aren't quite there, or you're frail, and there's a danger of falling. And a lot of people then start thinking, okay, I need to move my loved ones into, an assisted living facility. My parents have been in the same house for years and years and years. Not actually my parents, because my parents moved like every few years. But, in general, you don't
Yeah.
want to leave your house. You don't want to go to assisted living. Like you feel like you're giving something up. You're giving up that autonomy. So how can we use this technology, the wearables and other things in the home environment, to be able to track and understand what's going on there? Now you can age at home where you're much more comfortable. You're very familiar with the environment. And it is a huge change that we're seeing in the field of digital health. So there's technology that, one, is not invasive. So you don't necessarily need a camera, in each room of the house to be able to like watch your mother and see what's going on. There's sensors that you can put under the mattress. Okay, my mother got up this morning. She opened the refrigerator. She closed the refrigerator. She turned on the coffee machine. These are normal sequences of life. You can use the AI, then look at those patterns over time and recognize them as the normal patterns of behavior. So when there's a deviation, okay, call up, son, daughter, wherever that caregiver is, and be like, hey, you might want to check in. Your mother normally gets up, every morning at 6:30. It's now 9. She hasn't gotten up yet. She hasn't turned on the coffee yet. There's an indicator of like, hey, check in.
That's huge. So like wearables, yeah. Well, I mean, we know, like for the most part in general, like people use Apple Watch, even though they didn't initially maybe use it as a wearable for health. Now everyone in some way, shape, or form checks it. But the parent thing, that's huge. That's actually because like I remember, we had the Life Alert bracelets, which was like a very low tech version of the original, like thing, a wearable, but not really. But understanding if there is a system where you can have basically your parents' entire day turned into data that can now be parsed through an AI that will be like, well, your parent has been waking up later and later, and then you can be like, oh, I wonder why, or they're taking more naps. So like, there's so many applications. That's huge. Back to your triathlete. So what is your go-to wearable, or what's your favorite wearable? Because I feel like you probably have a few, because most of my athlete friends have 3 or 4. Right now, all my friends love Garmin.
Yeah,
But
it's interesting. Being in the field, I've been an early adopter of a lot of this technology and more heart rate monitors that had various leads and wires that would go and attach to different points in your body when, I'd go run and stuff like that. After a while, I burned myself out actually on all of the stats and the numbers. And when I was running, every run had to be like 1 second faster. And if it wasn't, then, like mentally it was like, oh, it wasn't a great workout. So for a long time, I did get away from that quantitization of every aspect of what I do. And I sort of then level set. Right now I wear the Aura ring so I can track my heart rate and understand, what I'm doing sort of after the fact, and try and really run. I think of it as like, as I run or exercise organically. It's like, okay, how's my body feeling, as I'm out there, swimming or biking, kind of thing. One interesting new technology that I started using, though, the company called Form, they have goggles that you wear. These goggles, and it has a heart rate detector built into it, and it fits against your temple next to your eye. And it has a display inside the lens, so it tracks, strokes per minute and your laps that you're doing, all very useful information. But it also shows your heart rate real time. And, so the Garmin watches, the Apple watches can do this. The Oura Ring does it. Lots of technologies can do this. But you don't typically sit there and watch it real time.
yeah,
So now I'm swimming, and the first time I used them was during a race. And it was like, oh, there's my heart rate. And it took getting used to be
Yeah.
seeing my heart rate in real time. Like, then you start, getting anxiety over it. It's
Yeah,
like, is
yeah,
it
yeah.
too high?
Should I slow
Am I
down?
pushing too hard? And you have to get used to that kind of thing. But it's interesting because the particular goggles, they also have like a compass in it. So one of the problems and challenges when you're swimming in open water is like, do you actually go straight?
Yeah.
So you might technically the course be like 1 mile, but if you're not going straight, you're going zigzag, zigzag. You might be swimming like 1.2 miles.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So hoping the compass helps even that out kind of thing, which will speed me up a little because I'm not swimming as much. But yeah, seeing your heart rate in real time it took a little getting used to.
Yeah, I can only I remember I ran in high school. I ran cross country, and I would sometimes when I first started would be like, ran a lot. So like, am I having a heart attack? It would be nice to know that I wasn't. It would be nice to see that if they have that for like running glasses, which I'm sure someone will come up with, or someone has already come up with soon. But no, that is really cool. And you said the company's called Forum,
Form, FORM. Yeah.
FORM. Okay, I'm gonna because I've been wanting to get back into swimming for a while. Um, okay, so I've written down how it's used or innovations in chronic condition management. So I understand, I mean, what chronic conditions are, but if you could maybe go into a little bit about remote monitoring, I get in terms of what we're talking about for the parents, but how does this help for chronic condition monitoring?
It's similar aspects. It's understanding what happens between those office visits. So if you have diabetes, and as you eat things with carbohydrates or just sugar in general, it's going to drive your blood glucose levels up. And until you get much higher, you don't really feel that day to day kind of thing. Like if you're on the high side, if you go low, you can actually pass out and die. So it's much more evident when you go low than when you go high. But that's making and impacting your body on a daily basis. If your blood glucose is always high, impacting your body, and it impacts the micro vessels, small blood vessels in your body. That's why you hear a lot of stories of people that have diabetes. As they get older, their foot has to be amputated or a toe has to be amputated or something like that. Or you get diabetic retinopathy, which is, a leading cause of preventable blindness. It's impacting your eyes. We can make a difference in treating that. And so it's really understanding what's happening day to day. There is a lab test for, if you have diabetes, the A1C lab test. That's a 3-month average. And so if you think of an average, you could stay really like around 100 all day, or you could go up to 120 and 140. But then if you balance that out by going down to 90 and 80 during the day, now you're going up and down and up and down and up and down. That's not good. It's much better to be, much more streamlined and not have those huge variations in your blood glucose. And so now they have continuous glucose meters that you can see that information is sometimes as much as, 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes, see what that data is to really understand what's going on in your body. And as you eat a particular meal, my body reacts to eating banana and you react to eating a banana are not going to be identical. They're going to be different. And so being able to see that data and understand, one, you as an individual, how can you make changes, but then sharing that information with your entire care team. You might be talking to a nutritionist, your doctor can provide really targeted advice, understanding what happens between those office visits. And now, and I wore one of these, a number of the manufacturers have the same continuous glucose meter device for people without diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm fortunate I don't have diabetes, but I'm curious what happens, when I eat a particular meal. We help companies develop algorithms in visualizations of this data. And so I know a lot of the science, but then to see it in real life is fascinating. So one thing, everybody can do this, eat a meal, and then sit down on the couch. Don't do anything. The next day, eat a meal, but go for a 10-minute walk, for a 15-minute walk. I talk about doing triathlons, which is a lot of physical activity. You don't need to do that. Go for a walk, and it will make a significant difference in your blood glucose. Something that simple. And you can see that in the numbers as I wear this device, and anybody can wear these devices nowadays. Or if you have diabetes and you wear a continuous glucose meter, you can see this in action, which is a very powerful teaching moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I will say, you're right that a walk isn't as much as a triathlon. But for some people, after eating, to be physically active is like a triathlon, because like some people like to eat and just like get on the couch and do nothing, or like Thanksgiving time, that's a different excuse, right? Because that's what the turkey does that to people. But so question about the wearable. Wait, what was this? Okay, what did I write? Oh yeah, okay, no, I got it. Handwriting issues. How far are we, or is it already happening that this data can automatically get to our doctors? Because I feel like in many cases, like your doctor would love to know if you have like a blood pressure thing. Okay, well, how's your heart been the last 6, 8, 9 months? And mind you, a lot of people say like Apple Watches aren't the most accurate. However, they can tell you trends. No matter how accurate they are, they'll tell you the trends regardless. So are we at a point where we can be like, hey, here's this data?
Yes. And we've been there for a good couple of years now.
Mhm.
Yes, it is relatively easy now for your doctor for you to share this data with your doctor. The particular challenges now are from a workflow perspective on the medical side of like, how do you streamline that experience to make it easier for your doctor to get that information? A lot of the systems out there, blood glucose, blood pressure, and others, there is a mechanism to share this data, but then how are you getting it to them? Do they have to log into another application to see it? Well, now you're disrupting the workflow. So yes, the medical professionals can gain access to this data, can benefit from it, but the challenge then becomes there's so many devices out there. There's so many ways of visualizing this information. And that's standardizing in some conditions and in some ways of looking at this medical data. So it is easier to understand, and healthcare professionals can be more familiar with it and get trained on how to use this data. But the big issues now are still around workflow and streamlining that such that when you are in the medical records and electronic medical record system, you're looking at the labs and what medications the patient may be on, like side by side there. Hey, here's their blood glucose, data. Here's their blood pressure information, their heart rate information, their sleep patterns over time. That's where the challenge is still really lying.
I don't know. I think we just came up with a startup idea. One company that standardizes everything and then owns the market, and then that's it. It's done.
If it was only so easy.
Right? That's how easy. So, we had a joke that in college that, Friday night we go out partying, Saturday we spend the day coming up with a business idea, and then Sunday everyone's sober again and we realize this isn't happening. And that's the fun part of starting a business in college. You don't really actually have to start it. You just have to pretend, right? All right. So actually, okay. So speaking of those challenges, can you tell me about challenges that you face when you're implementing new technology, like implementing brand new technology, outside of, so in this case, we talked about streamlining this data, but when you're coming up with something brand new, I assume that hospitals and healthcare in general they're probably a little bit rigid on terms of trying out new things, because people's lives are kind of pretty much at stake. So what are the challenges there?
How long is this good? How long are we going to talk for?
We got time. We got time. Let it
whole
all
other
out.
Healthcare is particularly challenging. One, because of the risks involved, but there is a very well-established research mentality in healthcare. As you propose a research study or you do a pilot study within a healthcare system, very established methods of doing this. Informed consent. There's an investigational review boards as you come up with the idea for a study to implement a new system kind of thing, that it goes in front of a committee to make sure that it's not going to do any undue harm to an individual, that you're going to inform the participants in a particular study what the risks are, so then in an informed fashion they can agree to a study. So there are accepted mechanisms for doing that. But the unfortunate challenge of healthcare is, for startups, you get interest in an institution. You need a clinical champion. You need somebody on the inside to champion you through the process. That process could take a year or more. So as a startup, that is particularly challenging to go through that process and wade your way through everything like that. We talked about HIPAA. You need to make sure that, if you are a technology solution, that, you have applied the appropriate security to the solution so that it is secure from that perspective. Getting buy-in is tough. Doctors are not sitting around with, on time on their hands. They need to see, 15, 20 patients that day, so how do they incorporate this into their practice? How do they incorporate it into that workflow? So you have a lot of challenges from that perspective. And then from a business perspective, if you are selling a new cereal or a new Bluetooth speaker kind of thing, it's like, who are you selling it to? Okay, well, here's the consumer that you're selling it to. Yes, you have to get it into the store and onto the shelves, or you could sell it directly to the consumer. In healthcare, there's a disconnect of who's paying for it, who's using it, who's benefiting from it could be different, So you as a patient individual might not be paying for it. The insurance company could be paying for it, and it's benefiting, you as an individual, but now the health system has to use it, but they're not paying for it. So you got to get buy-in from a bunch of the different participants in the process to make sure that it lines up and that you can have a successful business. I've seen a lot of startups over the years, and it's always challenging to have these conversations with people that like have a great idea, and they're like, "We're going to be brilliant. We're going to tell the doctor about it, and the doctor's going to recommend it to all their patients." And that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
There are just too many things out there, too many things for the physician to think about, that you can't rely on the doctor to do that recommendation. Think of drugs. The drug companies are successful because they have salespeople that are constantly going out there and reminding the doctors and nurses in the practice, hey, prescribe our drug, prescribe our drug, prescribe our drug. If you're a digital health startup kind of thing, you don't have that reach, that amount of people to go out there and constantly do that reminding. So we have seen, in just as an industry, particularly, like, you'll get one health system, and then getting that second and the third health system is increasingly difficult.
Yeah. Well, also for like pharmaceutical companies, they do studies forever, and they have the backing because they've sold a different drug that's making the money, so they can do the studies, and they don't, because you said it takes about a year, and I'm like, for a startup, that's death. Like they're out of funding month 9, and they're still waiting, and I think what it comes down to is it's unlike other startups where you just need your first few people to start doing it, then it goes on TikTok, and then it's viral, and then everyone's downloaded the app, for lack of a better example. Here, even if you get 100 people to use it, you need a whole other 100 set of doctors to give it to 100 other patients independently. And it's not like, hey, I heard about this drug, can you prescribe it to me? Because you probably don't have a budget to be on as much ad revenue that pharmaceutical companies can spend. But
Right.
so with all of this being said, if you're giving advice to a startup founder in MedTech, what are some things they can do to avoid some of these pitfalls? What is some things? And again, we know that it's going to be hard no matter what. I'm hoping if if you're in MedTech and you're starting a company, the hurdles. You should have done the research before you started the company. But what are some pitfalls they can avoid, and how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, it is. You sort of suggested it, is like, do your due diligence going into it, making sure that as part of your team, you have a medical professional, someone that has that experience, has the and the knowledge and understanding of the industry to be able to take on those challenges and lead, and gives your team that credibility kind of thing. So I could sit here and be like, oh, I'm going to create a new application to look at blood glucose, but I'm not an MD. Having an MD as part of that starting team, or at least as advisor on your board of advisors to really guide you, hugely powerful. Like with any company, you want to listen to your users. So make sure that you have users, if you're attacking diabetes or hypertension, multiple sclerosis, any number of these conditions, that you have people that are on your advisory board helping you, make good decisions and drive solutions that are really going to make a difference. Get those pilot studies going as early as you can, but it's doing your due diligence is a big part of it. And if you're going to develop a system that has to be approved by the FDA, talk to the FDA. And they're there to help you. It was definitely intimidating to be like, oh, I'm going to go call the FDA and tell them about what I'm doing. But you need to do that. You need to, understand what their requirements are and what they're looking for, because it can guide your decisions. A lot of the FDA purview is around what you're going to claim your device is going to do. So if you manage those claims, you can, mitigate the overhead that's required through the FDA. You see a lot of, vitamins and minerals and things like that, or devices on TV of like not intended to diagnose or treat a condition kind of thing. And that's what they're doing. They're not claiming it's going to cure an illness.
Yeah.
The
commercial makes it kind of seem like it is, but maybe it isn't.
Yeah. You walk a fine line, and if the FDA it does happen, the FDA will, see some of this advertising, and then they'll send you a warning letter, be like, you gotta stop saying that. You can't say that. And then, okay, to change how you do it. So yeah, you do want to start. I think nowadays in digital health, how do you get that early stage, that early momentum kind of thing, where you can get faster adoption? Don't necessarily need that medical professional as part of the picture to start building it up, and then bring them into the picture kind of thing. Because you need to gain traction as quick as possible, and you're going to gain that traction through people using the application.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're relying on the patient to take it to their doctor and be like, hey, look at this data, can you start using the system? You don't have time to do that.
Yeah, not for one patient. Maybe if all of his patients came inside this, or her patient came, it's different. Are wearables? Do wearables have to be HIPAA compliant?
They do not. So HIPAA compliance comes in if there's a healthcare professional involved. So yeah, I can wear my Oura Ring. You can wear your Apple Watch. You're not sharing it, and the healthcare practitioner is not part of that picture, then HIPAA doesn't apply. What does apply, and people tend to forget, is FTC. They look at privacy of data. So even if you're collecting this data and you're not sharing with a doctor, or healthcare professionals are not part of that picture, you still need to worry about the privacy, security of the data, because the FTC is going to come and look at you and confine you as well. So it doesn't give you a free pass if you're not bound by HIPAA.
Wait, so back to our business idea from earlier. If there's a way that these things automatically get sent to a doctor, then they would have to be HIPAA compliant at that point, right? Because it's going directly to the doctor.
As part of that kind of.
So that's probably why they don't have it. That's probably why no one's trying to make this a singular thing. Okay, very cool. All right, so then let me ask you now about Estenda. How does Estenda Solutions fit into this? How do you help successfully implement these solutions? Tell me the story.
Yeah. Estenda is a company I co-founded with a good friend, Drew Lewis, back in 2003. So it's crazy to be able to talk about decades of doing this, but it's been an amazingly fun journey, and it's just getting started sometimes, I think. We focus on innovative solutions that help improve the health and wellness of people. So projects are typically involving like an MD and a PhD. We work, if it's like a corporation, it's with like an R&D group is who, we're working with. How do we get medical device data? How do we connect it with the data that's in the EMR, the labs? How do we visualize this information to improve health and wellness of a patient? So whether it's a diabetes company, it's, someone doing heart rate or looking at, MS from these different perspectives, or even just trying to capture behavioral information. How is your day going? How is your mood kind of thing? we're developing these solutions to help improve the health and wellness of people. So it's just gives you that good feeling at the end of the day. The first 10 years of our life was really grant-based focused. So as we were working with people, we'll be like, let's go get a grant together. And we go to like NIH, or we did a lot of work with the Department of Defense and the VA. So they do a lot of healthcare grants to be able to improve their population health kind of thing, whether it's the soldier or the family of the person in the armed service. So that was probably the first 10 years. The last 10, we still definitely do a lot of grants, and I'll tell you about one in a second that we're on the verge of getting. But then we've also done this blend of more commercial work, where we're helping other vendors develop their products and solutions, whether they're Fortune 500 or startup organizations. And a startup organization is usually not the two people in the college dorm because they can't afford, consulting fees. But it's someone that's exited their first company, has some funding, wants to give back, but doesn't understand healthcare, doesn't understand technology. So we'll partner together to develop a solution. We're fortunate that, because we're on that R&D side, we're very much part of the solution creation. We're not the company where you're like, I know exactly what I want to do. Here you go, Estenda, go and do it. That's not us. It's like, I have an idea. Let's explore this together. We've had a number of clients put our names on patents together with them over the years, which has always been fascinating. The first time years ago that it happened, I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I don't own anything. A client owns all the intellectual property and everything like that. We are very much fee for services, but it's still fascinating to be able to have that happen. And then because there are R&D related and experimental, then they have to go into a clinical trial. Does this really work? It's one thing, for me or a doctor to be like, hey, here's a great new idea that we can, do medication recommendations. And you got to try it. You got to test to see if it actually works. So that's where that PhD comes in as part of the story to help design a study, to help look at the data. We have a couple of PhDs on staff that can participate in that process. And then we're writing journals that go into, clinical peer-reviewed articles and stuff like that. And we have developers that are on those articles because they've been part of the journey of creating that product or that clinical trial. Some of our developers with their names on articles, I don't think they quite realize what it means to have their name on a clinical journal article, where they're very much worried about the code.
Yeah.
Like, hey, it's a pretty good thing that your name's on that article. So yeah, it's been a fascinating journey of just helping develop these different systems and technologies over the years, and lots of challenges. I did a system in diabetes medication recommendations about 15 years ago now, but I still remember sitting in a room with a dozen endocrinologists, and which is the specialty that takes care of people with diabetes, and nurses and educators, nutritionists, and we'd have a profile of the patient. And be like, okay, how are we going to advance the treatment of this patient? How are we going to take care of this person? And if there was, 12 people in the room, there was 15 opinions. And I'll never forget, this one doctor just turned to me. He's like, good luck, RJ. It's like, sitting in this room, we can't agree on what the next step is. And it's like, now I got to, develop algorithms to do that. And it took a lot of work and, with that group kind of thing to, okay, here's, the care and treatment pathways that we wanted to follow, that we wanted to implement in the algorithms. But we were able to develop something and advance the science of, okay, here's the pathway of how you advance, medication recommendations. So it's fascinating to be part of that. And it's a privilege, and I enjoy the challenge.
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to get consensus amongst all those. So like, for after you come in together with the algorithm, is it still, I mean, I'm assuming there's less opinions, but I feel like there's not down to one. There's probably still pretty decent back and forth, yeah?
Yeah, there is still always, dissenting opinions. Dissenting is probably too small or too strong of a word. Different opinions on, so in a lot of conditions now, there are definitely, here are the recommended guidelines on how to treat a patient. But that's where that human, that doctor comes in, the nurse comes in and applies their intelligence. Like, okay, yes, this is the normal pattern of behavior. That's our first line. This is what we're going to do first. But I have experience with this patient over the last 5 years or whatever. It's like we need to go in a different direction that's going to
Mm-hmm.
work better for their patient. So with all of these, there's definitely some ideas of adaptability and how do you make it work for the individual,
Mm-hmm.
which again, coming full circle back to like the AI can start driving that really personalized medicine and go beyond just the standard guidelines.
Yeah. And then okay, and then you said your company still goes after grants. What?
Yeah, I did. I mentioned one. We're on the verge of, there's in the NIH, there are what are called in other government institutions, there's SBIR grants, Small Business Innovative Research Grants. And we partnered with a company here in Philadelphia called Monell Chemicals, and they do a lot of work around smell and taste research. And it's fascinating because until COVID happened, the idea of the loss of your smell, the loss of taste didn't get a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Then COVID happened and everyone started losing their sense of smell. I was like, hey, wait a minute, we need to pay attention to this. And the NIH's policy is interesting. They want you to share the data of your study such that other people can reproduce it and better understand what your research was. And their policy is to put the data into a domain-specific repository. So if you're doing cancer research, we're going to put that data in a cancer repository. If you're doing multiple sclerosis research, and into a repository specific to that. If not, there are general ones, that you can share that data. Well, there isn't a domain-specific one for smell test or olfactory research. So we're going to create one for olfactory research because a lot of research has been done over the decades and accelerated, more recently with COVID and post-COVID now. So we're able to aggregate all this data together to be able to start seeing patterns and trends across studies. And we're going to use AI on top of that to really see what we can find in this data. But interestingly, one of the things we're going to enable is the idea for non-technical people to look at that data and start finding those patterns and trends as well. Instead of having to know like a programming language or SQL or R or SAS, like some statistical language, or to be an expert in the use of Excel, just like you talk to ChatGPT and be like, oh, generate me some marketing articles, you'll be able to look at this data from that perspective. And it's like, okay, how many people, lost their scent and the ability to smell vanilla in, the greater Northeast, aged 50 to, 60, and start, teasing out patterns and trends and stuff like that. So be interesting to see what, as more and more experts get access to this larger data repository across studies and time, what they can do with it. So on the verge of getting that. So we're looking forward to getting started on that project.
Whenever I think of AI being able to like access data, I'm like, right now, till now or up until now, Excel, the use of Excel is every company, if you're doing anything data oriented, you have to know Excel very well. And, people are like, oh yeah, I don't need to use a mouse when I'm using Excel, just keyboard, all that good stuff. In like 5 years, you're not going to need Excel. You're not even going to have to look at the data. You just ask for what you need to understand in terms of trends or what you're looking for. And it's in your face. And you no longer, I mean, I wonder what Microsoft's going to do then, but they'll probably come up with something new. And it'll be wonderful. All right. Well, actually, before I move on, so you said the NIH makes it so that you have to make your data available so other people can reproduce. So what happens after that? Like, where does, what happens next? Like after people are or aren't able to reproduce what you did?
Well, that's the wonders of science. So, you do a particular study, you've done it once. I think it's like, okay, now can we actually reproduce this research? Because it is possible. We're all human. We make mistakes. Or maybe you made some assumptions during this study. When you read clinical research articles, there's usually a section on limitations of this study. It's like, okay, we only had so much money, so we could only do X, Y, and Z. Well, here's our other areas that need to be explored. Or just literally duplicate the research to make sure that applies to a different population.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those challenges. So if you're collecting data and you're at one of the top research institutions in, say, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and then you go to a small rural health community clinic in, Kansas City and, Arizona, is it the same? Like, you're getting the same results, or something particular about that institution. So by expanding it and doing it with different populations, you can make sure that the results of that study actually hold up in a broader population.
Okay, awesome. All right, now this is the fun part. So, we know you have a depth of experience. We know you've been in the business for a while. Can you take me back to seventh grade? Can you take me back to seventh grade with your early computer? I want paint me a word picture, and like what went from there. Because frankly speaking, a lot of people, especially now, kids nowadays start with smartphones, but a lot of people had computers when they were a little bit younger, and not all of them, went into tech. So take me from seventh grade, and I'd love to hear the depths of that story, into what went from, okay, this is cool, to this is my job.
Yeah. Um, it is, and it started even before that. And I still read extensively today. I still love reading science fiction.
Same.
I back then I read science fiction, Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov. A huge collection of stories about robotics and AI,
He's the
and
father
that's
of AI.
you.
Three
Yeah,
rules, right?
it's just the three rules. It's what really sort of drove my thinking of, oh my God, what is possible, kind of thing. And then I was really fortunate, in that when I was in seventh grade, my parents bought an IBM PC Junior personal computer. Back then, to have a personal computer at home was quite a luxury. My parents I still don't know how they pulled that off. I was one of six kids at that point. I think there's only four of us, running around, little rugrats. But they bought a computer, and it was fascinating to be able to do this. So that really launched my life of having that computer. We had an Atari in as well, and that the IBM PC Junior you could play games on too. I definitely played a lot of games, don't get me wrong, but I was also fascinated by what I could do with that computer. What could I make it do? So I started learning basic way back then, and just picking up. And back then you had to go and buy a book. The internet didn't exist
Can you
as per
define
se
what a
for the
book
general
is?
person. You remember books? You're like, yeah, you read them, and they were like 400 pages long, and it's like you had a problem, you had to sit there and hunt through it, and you went to a library and a card catalog to find everything. And so I have two girls in their 20s now, and it's like, look, do you know what this is? And it was like, it's our card catalog. Um, it's always fascinating, but yeah, I went through that learning process, and you know, it, I did a lot with like rudimentary graphics kind of thing. So it's like, how do you make a square bounce around on the screen? And, when it hit the edge of the screen, it would bounce in a different direction, and just create interesting patterns, and changing light color and stuff like that to make patterns. And, remember the spirograph that we all played with too back in the 70s kind of thing, doing that type of effect on the computer was just fascinating. And then, you start playing, making some early games too. There was one called Zork to really take us way back, a text-based choose your own adventure game. It's like, yeah, walk north. And then it would tell you what was in the room you were in. I did a lot of those kind of thing, and just a big series of, if then statements essentially. But and then likewise in high school, as I got into high school, then in the late 80s, we had a computer lab, and started learning other programming languages. And, I was the obnoxious student that, didn't, change the keyboard into Russian. And so
Every class had one of those guys.
oh yeah, I was that person, and it was just, the teachers would like know exactly who it was. I probably wasn't that smart, because it would be like, well, RJ sits at this computer,
Yeah.
the keyboard's messed up. Who did it? So maybe I wasn't the smartest, but I had fun just doing that. Or back then it was this DOS prompt, everything. There was no GUI interface and, kind of thing. I put a layer on top of that. So like every fifth time you would do something, you'd be like, no, I don't think so. Or just something fresh kind of thing. So it wasn't as obvious, that there was something wrong. But I never really got into hacking per se, but I definitely, played some practical jokes. But yeah, in high school then too, I got to play with computers and technology. I got really lucky because I went to a parochial Catholic school, but one of the professors there, one of the teachers, um, would go out to local institutions and get equipment donated. So we had a PDP-8 computer, which dates back to like the early 70s, and learned to program in binary, which was not fun. But, he's like, this is how computers really work. Nowadays, you don't even need to like know how to program anymore. You can vibe code and just tell the computer what to do.
Yeah.
Back then it was like, okay, here's the binary, and you would actually had switches for each bit, and then you'd have to turn a dial to like put it into the register. And if you screwed up one thing, then it wouldn't work, and it was just a nightmare. But I was fortunate from that aspect that I was able to play with that technology and get that grounding in computers and technology. And there's always, I think there's, two types of software developers in the world. There's people that know particular languages, like, okay, I really know C++ or I really know JavaScript.
Mhm.
And you can be very good at what you do. But then there's people that know how to program and get the most of that. And it doesn't matter if you're in JavaScript or C++ or C# or Java or whatever language it is. You understand the mechanics of like how a computer works and how to use a programming language, how to design a system. And that's just two different levels of people. Both have their places in the world. Both are equally capable of doing great things, but different mentalities there.
Yeah, I think
But yeah,
well, no, I was gonna say for that particular example, I think it comes down to passion versus like putting food on the table. Because I have a family member who was gonna be a professional cricketer in India, didn't work out. He's like, I learned how to code, and I was like, how do you just like that's some people's dreams, right here? And he's like, yeah, I didn't make it as an athlete, so I just learned how to code. As opposed to your story where it's like I really am interested in building these things and understanding the logic behind it. And it's very interesting actually because so I my background previously is a tech recruiter. So I used to be a part of companies that like, oh, we need a Java developer or we need XYZ. And then I went to a company like, oh, we're kind of code agnostic. Like we'll figure it out. We'll do an interview. We'll understand what this person knows. And like my first month, I just didn't understand what that meant just because the culture so far has been very much you're a Java, you're a backend, J2EE. Like you have to know these things as opposed to can you build it? Cool. Like we'll figure it out on the other end. Um, all right, that's awesome. All right, we're gonna get into like a little bit of philosophy because your early success isn't just about tech. I want to know about people and process. So I want to get into the depth of that because even before you started your company, can you tell me about what drove that lesson home?
I did. I came out of college and I was the software developer and was a hardcore developer for a good 10 years kind of thing. But one of the things I learned really early on, which has guided my career, is technology is important, but it is very much about people and process. It's like, who are you developing for? Like, you're not developing for yourself as a developer. And as you're creating, and we'll just say a basic patient demographic data entry screen where you have to enter first name, last name, address, kind of thing. You as a developer are going to sit there and do that 500 times in the course of developing that screen over the course of a week or whatever the functionality is. You're not going to think about it after a while. You're just going to get into this automatic road process of like, okay, I know first name and then hit tab and go in the next field. You're not developing for yourself. Like you are not the audience for, a lot of this. That's not universally true. There are some developers that are developing tools for other developers. But, we work in healthcare. I'm developing tools for, a patient that might not be able to see really well or not have great manual dexterity in their fingers. And so you have to think through these things, or, that doctor who's really busy and only has 7 to 10 minutes. Well, you can't make them enter the same data 3 times, or, wait for a screen to refresh for 10 seconds.
Mm.
That's a long time, like for you as an individual, and like, yeah, okay, no big deal. This is 10 seconds. But that individual who has to do that 500 times during the day, that's now a productivity drain.
Yeah.
So it is really thinking about, the people, the processes, how is the system going to be used? Maybe technology is not the right thing, or how do you apply a process that doesn't use technology to get you to the solution of where you are? And one particular example comes to mind. I used to work for a distribution company, and we part of it was like order entry software. And we had a particular challenge that saving the order would take a long time. So you would, thinking as a technology person, was like, you need to save the order and then print out the receipt to hand to the customer. Well, I'm visiting a customer site and they're complaining that this process takes too long. The contractors are coming in the morning. They want to buy their stuff to get out to the job site. Morning, they want to go. And your system is these printers were not the fastest thing either. So you had that challenge. And we spent a lot of time, a lot of resources on trying to improve the ability to save that transaction faster. How do we increase the speed of the transaction? We're thinking as technologists. In sitting there and observing the experience, it was like, wait a minute. I have all this data. What if I print it first?
Okay. I was right.
And
That's what I was
then while
thinking.
you're waiting for that printer to do its thing because it's slow, then save it. And, I still remember, like, the technology people were like, well, what if the save fails
Yeah.
and something goes wrong? I'm like, well, then you have a paper record because the printing never happened for them to re-enter it. So I just helped you out. And so by making that change, the customer was like, oh, wow, and it just completely changed the experience by making that switch and sitting in the back room, looking at the code and be like, how do I, save a microsecond here, a microsecond there? Wasn't getting you there, particularly at that time. The early days of client server back then. But yeah, and so it's looking at that people and process, which is really where you can make a difference.
Yeah. No, as you were telling the story in my mind, I was like, what do I think is the right answer? And what does he say is the right answer? And am I, do I understand what's going on? All right. All right. So then what was the, so the Estenda story, right? So what was the catalyst? What made you say, I don't want to just be an employee anymore? And then what was the initial problem? Because you said you started out with a lot of grants, right? So what was the initial problem that you were thinking about solving? But before that, let's get into what made you rage quit your job. No, I'm kidding. But what was the catalyst?
There was no rage quit. It was an interesting time. Drew and I used to work at another company, so we knew each other, kind of thing. And that company had lost a project. And it was also a time when the IT industry was tanking. So I was a manager at the time, and there was maybe 400 people in our local office, and it went down to overnight, virtually to like 100 people. It was just losing opportunities. Prior to that, the sales staff could do, just throw a dart and you get a new project kind of thing. And then the world changed, back then. It was relatively right after, 9/11 and everything like that. Things were changing. It wasn't as easy. It was post-internet boom, through the late 90s. Money was everywhere. So things were changing. And so, yeah, we were doing a lot of work in the pharma field kind of thing. So I had prior been in other industries and did some stuff in mortgages, and I talked about the inventory management, and I did railroad car scheduling. I used to work for U.S. Steel and kind of thing. It was like, they just weren't fascinating enough to me. And it was a reflection of like, where are the challenges? Where, it's like, okay, I've created an accounting system. I've created inventory management systems, and and they're fun and interesting, but it didn't really get me going. And the idea of getting into healthcare was fascinating because things were just really starting to pick up. Healthcare has always had a lot of technology. Look at your MRIs and CAT scans and X-ray systems, but data was very new to the healthcare world, and what can we do with it? We were just starting to look at some of these early wearable devices and we would track these information. And I'm like, there's an area where there's lots of good, juicy problems to go after and figure out, how do we do better here? That was what the driver was. And Drew happened to know some folks at the Joslin Diabetes Center up in Boston, one of the premier research institutions in diabetes. They had a congressional grant for the development of a diabetes disease management system in military healthcare. So we got to work with, Walter Reed Army Medical Center, the Boston VA, the Indian Health Services here in the U.S., and a lot of community health clinics. And that's how we got our start, So we had a client, a project. It was 5 years grant cycle. So, our first management challenge was managing, we knew after 5 years, this is essentially going away.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, okay, how do we manage through that and build over time? That's where it's like, let's go get another grant. Well, let's go get another grant, which is made fascinating. And it was the healthcare it feels special. It's that sense of when I go to sleep at night, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV, but I can develop systems and help doctors, help nurses, help individuals improve their health and well-being, and gives you that, little better warm and fuzzy feeling, and helps us recruit too. Like when we recruit out there, to be able to say to people, you're going to develop systems that help save people's lives, or at least help them live healthier and better, and it's a powerful incentive for people to come work for us.
They help people. That's wonderful. So at that time, what's some of the, when you first decided to make the launch, biggest like uncertainties and risk at that time? Because everyone wants, I shouldn't say everyone, that's not accurate, but many people want to start businesses, like I said in college, but that jump, it takes a lot of guts, right? A lot of intestinal fortitude, as it's been called in the past.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting because I was also like in MBA school at the time and having my second child.
Oh, wow.
My wife wasn't working as much those days, so yeah, there was a lot of like, okay, gut check time. Let's go and do this. I had gained a lot of experience in managing and through that as a consultant, selling. I'll never be a sales to this day. I'm like, I don't identify as a salesperson, but I have to, sell. And it's just part of the world and having your own company. I'm out there doing business development and closing opportunities and finding new opportunities. But had a lot of that experience and having, Drew, great guy. There's, one of the advice you hear from time to time, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. Surround yourself with good people. And I still try and do that every day. And Drew's just one of the really smart people too. And we got along really well. Still to this day, we get along, really well, and be able to look at opportunities and, drive the company is a great experience. It's been 22 years now. And, still going strong. It's a great experience. We didn't have a ton of risk early on because it was a grant. And back, unlike today, that was a pretty stable thing to have a government grant. Nowadays, it's a lot more iffy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's the reality we live in. And so, yeah, it was a fascinating time going out and finding an office and doing the networking and running wires. And, at one point we had our servers, the cloud didn't exist, so you were physically buying servers and setting them up. And at one point they were in Drew's house and we had the servers in the basement, and so computers were upstairs and we were running network cables up and down his steps, and his wife at the time was not happy.
Can imagine.
But we did what we had to do to get stuff out the door.
It sounds like you timed it perfectly just so that the movie is very interesting, right? In that time in your life, I feel like in a movie, that's exactly all of the tension points to have a great story arc.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about productive harmony and the motivation behind the thought process. And I'll let you go from there.
Thank you. Productive Harmony is my first book. Fascinating journey. I've thought about writing a book for the longest time. I do a lot of writing for work, and you write white papers, sales proposals, those types of things. I do a lot of public speaking at conferences and, do a lot of scientific writing. And so this was a different opportunity. What can I write about? So my first thoughts were sort of obvious of like technology, and AI was sort of coming up. So I was like, oh, do I do something in AI? And that's overdone. I'm like, I don't know. So it was a lot of reflection of what drives me, what has made me successful over the years. How have I accomplished everything I've done? So in addition to Estenda, I started a baking company at one point, which is a whole other story.
Oh, we're gonna get to it. We're gonna get to it.
I was open the door to a whole nother conversation. We did develop some software. We did a lot with diabetes, developed some software, spun off a second company, independently raised some money, ultimately shut that down. So doing a lot of these entrepreneurial things along the way. My triathlon, I ran an Ironman triathlon a while back, kind of thing, all of which take a lot of energy. And this is where the idea of productive harmony came from. It's like, what is driving my success? How can I continue to do all of this? I have lots of irons in the fire and lots of opportunities. I'm never dedicated to just one project at work. I help manage a lot of the HR. I do a lot of recruiting. I'm still involved hands-on in some projects as a very high level, guide the vision, make sure, customer success, make sure everything's going well, setting technical direction for the company, solving all sorts of problems. It's around energy. And so the idea of productive harmony is, you only have 24 hours in a day. You can't do anything about that. So you really need to focus on energy. Time management, as we classically think about it, doesn't work for the modern day office worker. It just doesn't. You really need to think about energy. And so that's what productive harmony is. It's just that. It's like, think first about energy and not in time. And one of the fascinating things is I was starting to write this book. I'm part of the company I'm working with is called Manuscripts Press. And it's called the Modern Author Program, where I own the book. So if you go to a typical publisher, they're going to own the book. Mm-hmm. And then you get royalties as that book sells. And you get a very small amount of money per book that actually sells. In this model, I own the book. I get the majority of the money when it actually sells. And I just have to pay the company for printing. So it's a hybrid model. You can now absolutely self-publish today.
Yeah.
But with this program, I have the benefits of editors. So in the early stages, I had an ideation editor, that helped me work through the process of what is this book about? What is the tension statement? What does everybody think about that's not necessarily true? And it's like, okay, I need to improve my productivity, time management. And it's more about energy management, making sure you apply, the proper amount of energy, that you have the energy to do the task that you need to get it done and get it done right the first time. And then I had a development editor and they keep you on track. So every week you had, targets to hit, which really helped me because obviously I have a lot going on. And so it was I know this week I had to do 5,000 words. Next week I have to do 5,000 words and so on until I hit my targets. And now I'm entering into a marketing phase, and then we're doing revisions now too over the summer. And then it goes to a proofreader and a copy editor, and ultimately it comes out this fall, and the company will create the ebook, soft cover book. There'll be an audio audio version out there for people to just listen to, which I do a lot as I'm sitting there running. It's like, you need something to do while you're running other than running. So it's just a fascinating journey. And going into it, I really thought everything had to come out of my head. It's like, okay, I have this idea. Energy, not time management, is the key to productivity and not burning out. Now I got to write 50,000 words, which I learned is around 200 pages. And they said, no, that is the exact wrong thing to do. You need to back up your thought process. Why is this true? So they had a rubric for each chapter. So as I wrote each chapter in the book, they taught you all about like the story arc, building tension and, revealing the solution. And so each chapter has to have a personal story. It has to have a first person interview, someone I talked to about this idea, has to cite 2 research articles. And typically you would involve, other, like if you watched a YouTube video on the subject that, you're presenting that. And that's what makes it interesting. And then as I went back and started looking at like all these self-help books and different things like that I've been reading for, decades now, because I'm a passionate reader. It's like, yeah, you're right. It's not like just this author, but like, here's my idea, but when the boom, it's like, here's why what I'm saying has credence and why it adds value. And one of the first stories I stumbled upon, which still fascinates me to this day, if you're familiar with the idea of Taylorism, Frederick Taylor in the early 1900s, he was the first person to really apply scientific principles to efficiency and time management. He worked for Bethlehem Steel, and he was tasked with, optimizing productivity. And so he would sit there and be like, how long does it take this person to pick up like a steel beam and walk from, one side of the yard to the other side? And how long does it take to do this task? And he would sit there with like a stopwatch and be like, oh, well, if you lift this way, if you move this way, you'll be more efficient. You can do more work. And this kicked off essentially, modern day theories and study of time management. What's fascinating in what history has sort of forgotten, he got fired from that job because after 2 years, he wasn't able to demonstrate a productivity improvement. He was burning people out. So when I read that, I was like, wait a minute, I'm on to something here. The guy that invented this was he failed, and we all just sort of forgot that over time kind of thing. And just in general, the nature of work has changed also with computers and technology. It's not now about lifting that steel I-beam and moving it across, the shipping yard. Yes, those jobs still exist, and more they're being taken over by robots to let us do, work that requires thinking. And thinking requires energy. And so if you can't focus on your particular task, you're not going to do well at that. There's this idea of just busyness as a badge of honor. Well, you're not getting anything done. You might be busy. You might look busy. You might be answering 50 emails, but are you getting anything done? Probably not. And so that's the idea of productive harmony. It starts with one, focusing on yourself, of eating better, moving more, getting the sleep you need. Those things are going to optimize your ability to have energy, to store energy, to then use it. And then as you're moving through your day and making decisions on what you're going to work on and when you're going to work on it, think about that energy. So for myself, I get up in the morning, I exercise, hour and a half. That energizes me. That gives me energy. And there was a period of my life where I didn't drink any caffeine. I now do. I'm back on coffee, and I drink my coffee now. And there was a good period of time, of years, where I just didn't need it. I think about that every now and then, but I do. And my wife laughs at me because I got the espresso coffee maker, and I got all bougie with COVID, and I enjoy a good cup of coffee now. And a lot of it's the ritual of drinking it more than just the caffeine. But when I got into running and triathlons, I lost 50 pounds. I lost the weight of a small child
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily feel bad when I was at like 225. I didn't feel bad. But when I went down to like 170 and sort of reflected on it, I'm like, oh, wow, I did feel bad. I didn't have the energy I now have. And my level of physical activity increased significantly. So I was doing more and having more energy. And it goes back to that where, I was talking about just go for a walk after dinner. That's going to make a difference in how you process that food. So if you do go out and eat a huge cheesesteak, yeah, you could probably go fall asleep on the couch, and I don't blame you. I would too. But if you go for a walk, that's going to offset that impact and be able to, carry into the rest of your day, help you digest better, and then you're not using as much energy in that transaction. So yeah, it was the book Product Harmony is about creating that framework of first applying that. How do you apply energy in your decision making? I really do focused work in the morning. At lunch, I tend to slow down, and that's where I'm doing the administrative stuff that doesn't need a lot of focus. And then I get a burst of creativity in like the evening, 4 to 7 kind of thing, where I try and focus on creative aspects of what I need to do. And it makes a difference.
So really quick, totally off topic. Speaking of cheesesteaks, I'm not going to ask you yet. I'm going to ask you later. When you said you were from Philly, I'm going to ask you later. But I do want to say the genius of Pat's and Geno's is you have to eat it standing up. That's all I want to say. I just think it's such a good idea.
Sorry.
But you have to just...
I gotta stop you right there, because if you're going to Pat's and Geno's, you're not going to the right places.
It's
they're tourist
the hate?
Destinations.
What's with the hate? See, that's the thing. I'm from Jersey, and that's probably why we used to drive. I swear I don't know how I did this in college. 2:00 in the morning, I'd get a text, "Hey, let's go to Pat's and Geno's." We would drive to Philly from Jersey, Central Jersey, hour and a half. Get there, buy a sandwich, eat a sandwich, and it was always a flip which one we're going to eat first, and then we would drive back and then eat the second sandwich. Don't tell me the best yet. I'm going to ask you later. You're going to tell me what the best cheesesteak in Philly is. I do have a list of like 4 or 5 that I rotate around, but I haven't had a cheesesteak in a while. But anyway, neither here nor there. The second thing is when you talk about energy, I think it's very interesting because I was a big schedule person or time box person for a while. And then there were times where I'd be in like a flow state and my alarm would go off or my thing would be like, oh, you got to switch to this. And I would force myself to change it. And I'm just like, and it's just like sucks, right? You're just in a new thing and you're just like, like, damn. So now it's more like start here and you have to work for X amount of time, figure out what it is, feel the vibe, right? Which I think is more in line with that energy idea. But I do want to ask about writing because the company you're talking about sounds very interesting. It sounds very cool. One, do they only work on nonfiction with nonfiction writers? And then the second thing is, when you first started, did you know about their framework, or did you go to them with something and then say, hey, you should try this frame? Because I feel like whenever I sit down to write, not that I've tried to write a book, but write anything, that's not like an email or directed at a person. If it's just an idea, I can tell you my idea in a paragraph, right? How do I turn that into 5 pages? And it takes energy, right? Even a LinkedIn article, I'm like, okay, I'm done, and it's 2 sentences, and I got my idea across. So talk to me about that idea outside of the framework they gave you. It's just like, how do you not finish your idea with, hey, energy, don't be stuck on the time, and you'll do good, and then that's it.
I'm right there with you because that's where I was at mentally and in my journey as a writer. They do work on fiction and nonfiction, and depending on your particular genre, they do have dedicated, like in those early stages, ideation and development editors with experience in that particular genre to help you. Like I know there's people that were doing poetry books kind of thing, and they had people that could help with that, or the memoir, kind of thing, your personal story. They definitely had people to help you out in those the particular areas. I happen to be writing, about productivity and sort of the self-help genre. Yeah, I didn't know. I knew I was going to get a development editor. I knew education was part of this program, which is really where it helped. Every week there was a different topic that just showed you, here's how you write, here's how you be successful as a writer here, and that's where they built this framework of, each chapter has to have X, Y, and Z to make it useful. So the guy that runs the organization, it's called Manuscripts, a college professor. He started doing this with some of his undergraduate classes and just realized there is a need out there. There are numerous companies that do this. I happen to like manuscripts and have had a good experience with them. But there was a huge education component as part of this. It wasn't just like write 5,000 words this week and 5,000 words next week. It was like a lot of help along the way in education about how to do a good job. Because it's like, okay, energy not time, done.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it was because I interviewed PhDs. I found PhDs in time management, which I didn't even know was a thing. But there are people out there that have PhDs in time management, the study of time and productivity, and it's easy to get those interviews and talk to these people because people want to share. That's like, hey, I'm writing a book. I'd love to interview you.
Yeah.
I did it. I was fortunate. I raced in the USA National Triathlon Championship last year, and I just walked around and was like, start talking to people. I'm like, I love the person that is like 70 years old and is out there and still racing. And I make a point of going to talk to those people. I'm like, how are you still doing this?
Yeah.
I have a goal of living to 100 plus and want to have a good quality of life. Well, okay, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Jones, wherever you may be, how are you at 70 plus still out here racing, in a triathlon? And so, it was easy. And hey, I'm writing a book. Can I interview you for my book? It's just people are like, oh, sure. No problem. Some people are like, what? Why me? Like, you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
What can I learn from you? So it was very easy to get those interviews and have the conversations. And, the writing is still difficult, but they definitely, by having a structure, made it easier.
PhD in time management, the closest thing that I ever thought about a PhD in time management was probably like Tim Ferriss with the 4-hour work week. Like the fact that this is an actual academic thing is so cool. And then speaking of you wanting to, live to 100, be a centurion, have you read, just because it's in front of my hand, I have to ask about it. Have you read Outlive? Because I feel like
Yes, I have.
Because Peter Attia is like the centurion guy, right? Like he's always talking about it.
Yeah, he's a little extreme kind of thing, but yes, I've read it, and for me, a lot of it is it's the core. How do you, your day to day life kind of thing. Tim Ferriss and Peter Attia, they're on the extreme end, and it's like take a lot of these supplements and this, that, and the other thing, and cold therapy, and I'm like, I can't. I'm not a multimillionaire. Like you can't do all of this. I have, my life to live, but exercise. I try and eat better. There's 100 diets out there. Which one?
Yeah.
None of them.
Yeah.
It's eat. I love, for a long time, I was saying, eat like your grandmother. Well, now grandmothers, it's not that long ago for a grandmother, and now it's a guiding philosophy is eat whole foods. Eat a food with a single ingredient. And you're going to be much better off. Eat the apple, eat the carrot, kind of eat the steak. There's, people that are vegetarian, vegan, and carnivore diet. It's like, no, eat that moderation, probably mostly plants, is going to be beneficial to your health. You're going to be better off. Move more. And that's the basic premises that I'm talking about. Get the sleep that your body needs. You are going to see a difference in your life by doing those really basic things. It's not hard, and it's not necessarily expensive either, because there is that challenge. People to try and eat healthier kind of thing. Oh, it's going to get it more expensive. And there are, beans, rice. Like, this is not, on the continuum of expense. They're on the cheaper side of things, and they are single ingredient foods.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, I think the thought process, at least for me, when I read Peter Attia or Tim Ferriss, is they're very outcome oriented, and I think I would say that's the main difference from them and the average person. Where it's like you saying that you want to live to 100. Some people don't think about that, right? Because like what Peter says in the book, which I think is interesting, because you don't have to follow it exactly, but just the thought process helps. Is that, well, if you want to hike, 3 miles at 100, what does that mean today? And you don't have to do the math. He did the math. You don't have to do the math. I mean, my mind is, can you do more than 3 miles today? Because that's that's the minimum, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
You know, I think he said it's like 3x or something. Neither here nor there. Let's be a little intentional in the health spectrum of things. And then food wise, yeah, it's I think there's levels to it where it's a spectrum of can you understand, well, this might be a bit much, but for me in my mind, because I used to be a big diet person, but now it's more like, can I understand basic macros? I don't have to count everything, but can I be like, this meal has more protein than carbs. This meal has less. Okay, and finding out what your happy place is and what makes you not feel like shit after eating, stuff like that, right? So skipping the Taco Bell, which I used to love, but now I've given up completely because I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
I still enjoy ice cream.
oh yeah,
Still passionate about tequila. I love a good tequila,
same, yeah,
but I'm also racing triathlons and I do fairly well. I'm not winning races, but in my age group, I'm competitive but yeah, you want to enjoy life too. So you don't want to completely lock these things out and be like, oh, you don't want to demonize, a
yeah,
particular food or a food category. And it's in moderation. It's like, okay, you're not drinking tequila every night. You're not having ice cream every night,
yeah.
but okay, have a little, sip here and there, enjoy the company with friends. Yeah.
Exactly. No, exactly. So one of my friend's uncles, he's in his, I would say he just had a birthday. He's in his mid 50s, and he's very healthy. Like a vegetarian, eats a lot of like raw vegetables, like very healthy, runs like 8 miles a day. Awesome, right? But then we'll hang out and he'll have like a bowl of ice cream. And so we have this internal joke, we say no school tomorrow. So it's like, we're not doing this every day, there's no school tomorrow. So like, why not?
Mhm.
And so, cause on his birthday, we had like 4 slices of pizza and ice cream and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, it's your birthday. You never ever do this. You do this 3 times a year, maybe. So no school tomorrow. Let's do that. And so actually on LinkedIn, I saw that the productive harmony framework, you have articles on LinkedIn. So is it just an expansion of what you're going through in the book?
Yeah, it's part of sharing my journey and what's going out there. I'm starting to, sprinkle tidbits and information it's where I am in the program now of writing is part of it is like, hey, for your book to be successful, you have to tell people about it.
Yeah.
It's not going to sell itself. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm starting to post more and more. I have an Instagram account, Productive Harmony now, where I'm sharing tidbits and information and stories and also stuff just about the journey and the challenges of writing.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kicking all that off. So yeah, gotta share, and eventually it'll get to the public speaking and keynotes and stuff like that at various different conferences and stuff, which I just find fun as well. So
Yeah. Oh, for sure. We just did the thing that I love most and the thing I aspire towards. We just did it. Is we talked about something that I had bullet points for without using the bullet points, and I knew it was later on because I was like I wanted to talk about like health and stuff, and we just went through it. And I looked because I'm scrolling down on my notes. I'm like, oh, I was gonna do that a little bit later, but we did it naturally, and we did it without bullet points, and that's the way that I like to do these things. So let's look at where do you see digital health and AI going in the next? I wrote down 5 years, but I feel like that's not long. That's a bit. We should go a little bit longer. But let's 5, 10, 15 years. Where do you see the arc going in the mid to near future?
wow. Um, One of my favorite quotes these days is Bill Gates. And he has said, we tend to overestimate what's possible in 2 years and underestimate what's possible in 10.
Mm,
I don't think we really know and comprehend where we're going to be in 10 years. And I know Bill Gates recently said, we're in 10 years, we're going to have 2-day work week. You know, he hasn't gone quite as far as Tim Ferriss and his 4-day work week, but he's, two-day work week because AI is an inflection point in society. This is what is driving the future for better or worse. It is driving the future. It is changing dramatically where society is going, many aspects, what we can do as humans from a creativity perspective, from a work perspective, for productivity. I do have a chapter on AI and productivity in the book because it's game changing. Think Gutenberg press, like when we could start producing books in mass quantity, the electricity, telephone, air travel, computers, internet, phone. What's interesting is these things are coming faster and faster, and we have less time to sort of absorb and understand and make them, part of life. But AI is changing reality for all of us, for better or worse. We have to understand that and challenge and work through it, but it's changing our jobs. It's not going to replace us. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around like the idea that this technology is going to replace us. I like calling it, saying it's augmented intelligence instead of artificial. It's augmenting us. How do we use this to help ourselves to be better, to do better, to be more efficient? I do try and use it a lot in my everyday, work and life, in my training. It's like you have these conversations with it. We have mental health challenges. We have obesity challenges. There are not enough professionals, when you talk about digital health, there are not enough professionals to take care of all the people that need help.
Mm-hmm.
Technology scales. There are AI systems in place now that can have that mental health conversation. You shouldn't just have it with ChatGPT because it is not designed for mental health. But there are versions of these technologies out there that are designed for mental health. And they're doing these research studies, again, because it's new technology, you have to understand them, that are making a difference in people's lives today, let alone what's possible 2, 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah. When we talk about, I just lost, because I had two thoughts in my head, and I hate when I do that. I don't write one of them down, because the one I was thinking of was when it comes to, like, when you said 2-day work week, I was thinking, like, whenever I think of the future in terms of like work and I don't think this as a I don't think this is a negative, but in my mind, have you ever read the Expanse novels?
No.
So Expanse, so they made an Amazon show. The books are amazing. The show's pretty decent, but in that one, they have like basic income, which everyone gets, and then if you do well in school, you get to have a job. Everyone else just gets basic income, but if you do really well in school, you get to go to, XYZ training and get an actual job, and then you can make real, more than just to cover your basic expenses. I think I don't know if that's where we're headed, but I think that not now. That's more like 100, 200 years from now, where AI can do a lot. Like, oh, so that's what I was thinking of, because I recently saw this thing where you can take a picture and use the tones of the color of your skin, your eye color, and your hair color, and it'll give you your color profile, which is what celebrities use to dress themselves.
Right.
So I sent this to my friend, and she was like, "Why do you need this?" I was like, "It's just like, in my mind, I was like, it's just like Ozempic. The celebrities had it before, we get it now. The celebrities have had this for years, and now we can use ChatGPT to get our color profiles." And so, similarly speaking, I think in 200-300 years, maybe less than that, I don't know, that only the jobs that need humans, creative jobs, some medical jobs, obviously politicians, because when are we ever going to let AI take over that one? But anyway, it's neither here nor there. Research. Okay, cool. So now we're going to head over, as we're wrapping up. I like to do this thing. It's a rapid fire round. I call it the FAQs, frequently asked questions. The joke is they're not really frequently asked, because every person gets a different one on the show, because I like to make it a little bit more specific. But we're going to go from there. So starting with, what is the biggest misconception about AI in healthcare today?
Oh, wow. Biggest misconception. That it's not capable of doing what you want it to do. I have talked to nervous, they go to conferences and stuff and talk to people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I tried it out and just wasn't impressed." Like, you didn't spend enough time with it. And that's a huge misconception, because then people are like, no, I'm not going to waste my time. You need to invest time in these. Simply ask it to produce output that emulates Bill Gates, that emulates Bill Clinton, that emulates Bill Murray, and it'll blow your mind away. You're going to get different replies, different interactions with it at that very simple level. In playing with it, I asked it about creating an application that helped people with peanut butter getting stuck to the roof of their mouth. It's just sort of a crazy idea. And it came back with one word and said, really? That's mind blowing. It understood the concept that this was not the usual request. This is unusual. And instead of just doing it, it was like,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, yes, please do it. And it
That's
did.
a little creepy. That's a little.
It is, but that's the power of the technology to have
Yeah.
those moments with it of what it's capable of. And if you're not playing with it and not using it, you're going to be left behind. So yeah, and biggest misconception is that it's just not that capable and it's not worth my time. It is.
I love that. What is your favorite productivity tool or app that you can't live without?
Well, as we talk about energy, it is really all about energy, and it's just being self-aware of where I am, and that's the key to my productivity. I use a lot of paper. In terms of productivity. I'm not a big user of like Notion and these different apps. I do use OneNote, and it's difficult to then see all of that information, to track everything, whatever I'm doing. You'll get these little things that flash in your head. Well, if you're going to then pick up your phone and write that down in your notes, well, then Instagram, Facebook, X is a finger tap away. You're distracted. You're gone.
Yeah.
Where just writing it down on paper, just quick, elegant, and hopefully you can read your handwriting later.
Yeah.
But it makes a difference. It doesn't distract you as much.
No, I love that, because that's exactly why I have.
There you go.
Post-its,
You got
because I write them, right? Because like I love my phone, I do love it, but at the same time, like that's the same reason I don't type notes while I'm doing this. I rather write them down, because it's just less time away. I could just jot it, even though I can't read it most of the time. It's just jot it down quickly, but it's still there. All right. Well, all right. So ooh, okay. This is an interesting one, and I don't know if you'd want to answer it. What is the most overrated and the most underrated wearable tech today?
Oh, wow.
You don't have to. You can tell us the most underrated if you don't want to say overrated.
Yeah, that's interesting. Over. I know, I'm thinking through, like, there's just so many things out there that we just haven't really like. There's things that'll measure your lactate or sweat. So there's an overrated thing right now. You can, and I have bought these because I'm just fascinated by it, but you can get patches that will monitor your rate of sweat. And the utility of that for the elite athlete is to be able to understand your level of sweat and have to replace, sodium, potassium and stuff like that. So, you can continue training. So for the elite athlete, sure, it has some applicability, but even to myself and the general person, it doesn't. So it's a little bridge too far. You don't quite need that level of information, about what's going on. So that's probably a little overrated. Underrated still, I think, is the idea of continuous glucose monitoring for people without diabetes. It is absolutely 100% essential for people with diabetes, but it's a powerful teaching tool that it's very new. It's in the last year, this tech has come out for people without diabetes. I think that needs to be seen and used out there a lot more for people to understand how eating different foods in their body makes a difference. I'd say that's the underrated one right now. It's just not on the radar at all yet.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think also as you age, it's good to know how your body's reacting differently to certain things. Because I think that's one that sneaks up on you. Like, and so speaking of cheesesteaks, I remember like I used to be able to eat one at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., go to bed, wake up and go to class. And now if I eat past 10:41, I'm like, something happened at 30. It just messed me up. But I digress. Speaking of which, I'll jump in. Best best cheesesteak in Philadelphia.
This is a two-part answer. So the core, I would go D'Alessandro's. Pat and Gino's is fine, but they're tourist destinations. D'Alessandro's a little outside of the city. I really enjoy that. A lot of it, for people not in Philadelphia, it's about the bread just as much. The bread is what really matters. But the other thing, and the unsung hero for those not in the Philadelphia, is the roast pork sandwich.
Mm.
Really, really enjoy that too. And Denix has a really good one. So I probably eat that more often than the cheesesteak these days.
Wow. Okay. Noted. And I will be trying that. I actually should go soon because I actually really love cheesesteaks, but haven't had one in a really long time. Let's see. Ooh, what's the first programming? Okay, so you said you learned binary, but that wasn't the first thing you learned. What was the first programming language you learned?
I learned Basic.
Basic.
I think it was even called GW Basic or maybe MS Basic way back when. But yeah, it was like a version 1 Basic kind of thing, really, really early on.
And what? Okay, I'm gonna skip this question because my other question's better than this one. All right, here we go. These are the five that I always ask, and they're my favorite ones. Best advice you ever got, or your favorite quote if you don't have advice that is the best that you ever got.
I read a lot of books, and particularly now that I'm writing a book kind of thing, paying attention to a lot of stuff. I think one is really don't worry so much about what other people think of you, particularly as I get older in my life, kind of thing. It's like you need to strike your own path and don't worry about what that other person's thinking about. One, they're probably not thinking about you to begin with. So yeah, strike your own path and just don't worry so much about what they're thinking about.
Love that. Best investment you ever made.
Um, I would in myself. Exercise. That to this day is the biggest investment I've ever made. I continue to do it. There is a real difference in my life and in moving more and in exercising. So yeah, just doing that. Physically it's good, but it also builds mental resilience. Like when you have to get up at 4:30 in the morning and it's dark out, or you got to go jump in a cold swimming pool or ride 30 miles. It's builds that mental resilience too. A physical product, I would have to go with I bought a Peloton bike during COVID. That really was a game changer too, to be able to just bike more when it is cold. I'm not an outdoor biker when it's cold.
Yeah.
I'm not that bad, but yeah, Peloton was really coming handy over the years.
Yeah, every single Peloton user I've ever met in my life, no one, like everyone loves that product. It's everyone swears by it. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna do the. All right, book you've gifted the most.
And being in technology, there's one called Clean Code that's really, and it goes to a philosophy of how you develop systems, design systems, and it goes to our philosophy of Estenda, and it's really everything we do is we're developing systems to help others. But as you are developing, you are that software developer. You really need to think about how you are helping other people. How are you helping yourself next week, next month when you look at that code? How are you writing better code, a better product to help the QA person test it better, let alone the actual end user of the product? In the better you can write code such that it's clean and easy to understand, and that's going to make a world of difference. You can write the most complex, beautiful algorithm, but if you can't understand it next week or the next software developer can't understand it, hey, you didn't do a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So as we're wrapping up, where can people get to know more about you, more about Estenda?
Estenda, estnda.com, our corporate website. Myself, LinkedIn, it's RJ Kedziora. It is there. And now with the book, I'm out there on Instagram, particularly posting every day at Productive Harmony. Love to share the story and really how can I help you is really what it's all about, whether it's through work and developing systems or sharing, my life story and information about using energy, not time.
That's awesome. All right. And as we wrap up, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with?
I think we covered quite a bit today. This was fascinating conversation. Usually, you do a podcast and it's like 20, 30 minutes and like, okay, where'd that go? This was good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening. And till next time.